Today's lesson is on the proper perspective. Sammādiṭṭhi has been translated incorrectly as a right view. From what I observe, or the proper instruction by the senior translator or qualified translator, it should be translated as a proper perspective. Because if we consider the wrong view and right views, we are in the trap of discriminative mind. And discriminative mind is not the proper perspective or proper view at all. If there's a right, there's a wrong. So right and wrong also the two sides of the coins. At this stage, we only focus on the proper perspective. What we see is not what we see, because always the interpretation in our minds, in our consciousness, tend to interpret what we see, or also dictate the way we see and how we see it. Everything is controlled by our education, by our upbringing, families, friends, environment, and our personal character, which all together control the interpretation or the mind translation of the phenomenon. Reality is observed through different angles and tend to be mistakenly translated in accordance to each own parameter. So when we talk about what we see is not what actually is, because what we see is reality, is only a portion of reality which is recorded in our mind. And our mind, through the consciousness and also the karma, the habit, will tend to translate one way or another the language and the color of the phenomena into a different way, not reflecting the reality at all. So how do we have the proper perspective? Because usually when the eyes, for instance, come into contact with the objects in sufficient condition or visible condition, then the first thing come up is citta, which is a emotional perception. And immediately the citta will come into the mind because it bring the vibration into reality, into the existence. As soon as the citta was thrown in by the emotional perception, the manual, which is thinking perception, will be activated. And what they do is that they keep thinking and they're referring to the vinaya, which is a consciousness, or correctly we should say cognitive perception. So three stages exist at the same time, in sequential, not in the same time, but because it's too fast, we cannot see it, but it's actually sequential. The citta, which is emotional perception, and then the manual, which is a thinking perception, and then cognitive perception, which is the storage of the information, and usually we translate as a consciousness. The consciousness and then shape the way we see and dictate what we should see and how we see it, and also the interpretation of what we see. which is reality. So everything played on together, and they create the image in our mind, which is created truth. It's not the truth, but it created truth. Then we react to our created truth according to our karma, according to our perception, according to our desire. The reality tends to be distorted in that way, nearly to the full extent that the people living in the illusion, because everything is translated according to the culture, character, and a huge millions item, million influential items, which dictate the way we feel. We see the objects, we feel about the object, and we interpret the objects the way we want. And we label the object with the name, and then we attach to that particular item with a certain feeling, liking or disliking, and then we develop the greed or craving. At this point in time, if we are not consciously thinking or consciously notice about what we see, is immediately the karma works the way it is, and we tend to feel, we do, and we behave in such a way that we are unconsciously doing the thing which we should not do, because it's operate in the unconscious fashion. So what we see is not actually what we see, so we have no proper perspective at all. We have no right view at all. We just react, and what we see, interpret it, and translate it. And even we attach to it a certain feeling or certain parameter. It's also the karma work the way it is. It's not the actually conscious or analyzing it. So, at this stage, if we look at the whole things operating at the same time, what we see and what we interpret is not actually what it is, but the way we feel, we like or dislike it, and we interpret it accordingly. For the same object, even the different time frame, we still have a different translation of the material, of the realities, and a different feeling about the reality. And that's the problem with the human nature. The morning is different, lunchtime is different, and evenings is different. Because different time frames, they have different characters, depending on how we feel and how we want to see, what we want to see. That's the whole thing about the changing, dynamic changing, unconsciously operating in our mind. So, if you are the serious vipassana practitioner, you have to contemplate not the object, not the nature of the object, or the changes of the object, but rather than the change of your mind. The change of your mind, the change in your perception, the change of your thinking, the change of your translation of the material. And how we translate it, depending on how we feel about the objects, and we tend to put label and give it a name and attach our feeling toward that name. So everything is created in our mind. It's not a reality at all. So how do we can translate the reality so that we can have the proper perspective? Number one, we have to avoid the what we call the dogma or fixation or conviction of our mind or paradigms, because it all controls by or influenced by our upbringing, education, friends, environment, family, so on. Too many things come into place. And we are not ourselves anymore, but we are a product. We believe that we are ourselves. But actually, we are a product of the created truth by the mind, by our own mind. So, The first thing is the dogma, the fixation or in our minds influence the proper perspective. So in order to observe or to see or to interpret it, which is close to the reality, we have to contemplate on the paradigm or the fixation. We see it arise and it disappear. So we are not influenced by all the fixation or the paradigm. Secondly, which is more important, and Buddha always mentioned about that influence, which direct us the way we see things, the way we interpret the thing, the way we feel about the thing, which is in literatures everywhere says that there's only three kinds of the influence: the greed, the hatred, and the ignorance. All three play together at the same time, so it creates a strong and dynamic influence on our interpretation, our observation, our interpretation, and our treatment of the realities. We also exhibit the manifest, exhibit the feeling, which tend to be influential to the translation of the realities, the way we want, the way we feel. So it's a whole thing about the perspective. So without the influence or interference of the three poison, we have the free mind, which is called proper perspective. We can see the thing clearly, we understand the thing clearly, and we have the good translation of the reality. And each person will have a different kind of translation of the reality. So don't expect that reality come into term, the similar term with the two kind of people. Needless to say, the people having a different culture, different upbringing, we have a different interpretation of the realities. So the differences is not important, but whether we can appreciate the differences which is existent of the phenomenon and also existence of the society. That the whole point. The whole point is with the proper perspective, we have the harmonized or to be harmonized position with the environment, which is the influence. So now, in summary, as soon as the six sense organs come into contact with six external factors, it causes vibration. And the vibration will be transmitted to your brain, and according to your karma, your habit, your culture, your upbringing, all sorts of things, liking and disliking, you will have developed the way of seeing, how you see, what you see, how you feel about the objects, and the name you attach to the particular objects, and how you feel at the end of the day is selectively. How do you feel about the objects, and even you feel about your knowledge about the objects, and everything is contributed to the understanding of the realities in a proportion. So proper perspective in reality is seeing it not the correct or the right or wrong, but seeing in harmonies with the environment, or seeing inconsistent with the environment, not in a contradiction, but only in harmony with the environment. So that is the point for the proper perspective. And tomorrow we'll have a conclusive, the evidence to show how the Eight Noble Pathways is just the instrumental methodology created by our mind to help our own mind to distinguish or to make distinction between the proper perspective or the right views. Because right views are what you say, the right views are always you have in your mind, right and wrong. And the Buddha teachings always mention about the middle pathway. That means you are not attaching to right or wrong, left or right. You only see it according to your interpretation. Undeniably, the reality is not reflecting in your mind as it should be, but it's translated into your culture, education, upbringing, environment, family, friends. So there is no such thing as a right views, because the right views in some circumstances may become the wrong views in other circumstances or a different time frame. Maybe right views for the same person, same objects, but later it turned out to be the wrong view. So I prefer to put the new terminology, which is the proper perspective in harmony with the circumstances and environment. And thank you for listening to me. That's the lesson for today.